Call the meeting of the Finance Committee for the Joint Water and Sewer Committee Commission open. Looks like we don't have any public comments, so we can move on to the approvals. Item 1, minutes from March 22nd, 2009 Finance Committee meeting.
So moved. Approval.
And it's just you and I who were here.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Second, all in favor?
Uh,
All right, passes. And we move on to approval item number 2, fiscal year 2020 budget plan approval. Item A, it's your show, Jimmy.
All right, what I'd like to just real quickly give everybody a little brief update based on events today. We started out, as we all know, Commissioner Copeland gave us some good guidance on how we wanted to approach the process and put together the information that would be most beneficial to the commission for evaluating what's in the budget. We made our first go. We went through taking the comments and the direction we got and made the changes that everyone was in receipt of or able to receive on Friday. And then in discussions today, this morning early, we came to the understanding that we had misinterpreted some of the instructions. We made the changes and went back and made the corrections, and to that end, I've included a summary page of the changes. Everybody's got copies of the summary now. It's separate and different from what's in the book that you've got. So that's to say these are the changes that achieve what we were trying to achieve, and that is to return equipment and vehicles to the operating budget and make sure that the cuts we were asked to do were brought us back to the or net. Let me rephrase that. The cuts we were trying to make would be to the original budget and would have to therefore take into account the additional additions or the addition of those vehicles and equipment items to the budget. And we've gone back and made additional changes that accommodate that. With that said, we'll move on to section A, which is a copy of the service agreements that we have with the various product and service providers that we work with. As you can see, it's a pretty diverse group of providers, contractors, consultants that work with us on various different things. To the extent that any of these are ongoing, we've got funds allocated in there. I will say that for anything that requires bidding, and most of it does, if it's a product, we or construction type service, we're bidding those items out, and that'll be done. Our target is to have all those things bid out and ready for service come July 1, and that's something our procurement folks are working on as we speak.
So like Bionomics, on-call manhole rehabilitation, are they still doing manhole rehabilitation?
No, sir, we're done with them until we rebid everything.
But don't we have some engineering firms already that's under contract, like EMC for Magnolia Park and some of those others?
But this is our operating budget, this is not our
Okay.
capital budget.
All right.
I'm sorry, I didn't make that clear.
Okay.
So all these are contracts, and it's just what we've actually spent this fiscal year.
These are the folks that we're working with today. Yes, sir.
And what about the technical services, Jeannie? We've got the vendors, the last page. Actual to 2019.
Commissioners, not all of the contracts will show up under technical services because they are coded to different expenditures. For instance, the contract with Pinnacle, who does our bill printing and mailing, that's a separate line item in the budget. So that's not included in the technical services, and there are a number of those throughout that list of contracts.
So this is meant to be a list of the contracts. I assume that this, which was attached to it, was meant to be the fees associated with the contract. You're saying these are two totally different?
They're two totally different things. There may be some crossover in that one of these particular contracts may go solely to technical services, but that may not be the case in all of them.
The one with the orangish brown background or tannish orange background, that is all services and products that we have on contract for our operating budget this year.
And going to the technical services sheet there, we've got several engineering firms listed there with small fees, and I'm not sure what they're being used for. Brown and Caldwell and,
Brandon Caldwell was doing,
EMC.
helping us with some permitting early in the year.
okay.
Apologize if I'm being thick-headed. What is this relevant to now? It's not relevant to this, which is attached to. What is it for?
This is relevant to technical services that would be in the 2019 actuals and looking forward to the 2020 FY budget. Under the sections that would be called technical services, I wanted us to have an idea of what was in those numbers.
I guess it just confused me because they were,
They're two separate documents. I asked for a list of all the contracts.
Are any of these on the contract listing for goods and services, bid as multi-year contracts, or are they single-year contracts?
Right now,
All of our contracts, Commissioner, they're written for 1 year with option years to renew at various prices. So each of them should be a 12-month contract. They may span the
It's a
fiscal
12
year.
month, but they're multiple years.
They're multiple year, but they can be canceled after if the option's not exercised.
Could you update this to show how many option years are left? And that's after, that would be in
beyond the end of fiscal
2020.
2019.
Yeah.
How do we determine what kind of service qualifies for technical service? I mean, some of these don't look like technical services to me. What's the
Some of
definition
this-
of technical services?
Some of this is not.
Some of them are simply miscoding. Somebody has keyed in the wrong number when the wrong account number within the accounting system that it probably should have been coded to another account. We find these things periodically as we go through accounts and reclassify them to the account that they should have gone to. Most of the time it's basically human error. They put a 2-0 instead of a 1-0 at the end of that 9-digit account number.
So if this $403,000 is listed under technical services to date, some of that's been miscoded. It should have been someplace else in the budget, is what you're telling me.
That's what he said.
Yeah.
I don't want to nitpick this.
In the
What is-
actuals.
What is the $30,000 for drinking water fees?
That is, excuse me, that's part of the testing services we have to do every year for the water production facilities. Water production facilities, they have to submit to annual testing, and it comes very early in the fiscal year, so that kind of looks bad for a while, but that's generally the same price every year.
So the
That's-
drinking water fees is actually what we're paying somebody else to test our water.
That's the money we pay EPD. isn't it?
That's correct, that's what we
Yeah.
pay EBD.
That's the copper testing and some of this other stuff.
Okay, so some of this other stuff is by the name of the company, and this is actually by what it is versus the name of the company, so it threw me off.
Integrated Network Solutions, 113,000, that's the largest one on the list.
That's our SCADA?
They do the, servers. Server
Oh, that's our,
maintenance.
the internet and the server activities by Mike and them. Okay.
That's our full systems, integrated network systems, INS.
Oh,
They do all of
okay.
our programming and, you know, anything that we need with our system and the server. They do all the backups, periodically, and whenever it crashes, they come in and they take care of it.
I see, so we don't handle that in-house, that's an outside,
The INS
Service.
INS provides a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week service to us. They actually have alarms on our computers that let one of their technicians know that something is going on with it, so that we ensure that our systems are not going down all the time unnecessarily.
That's the website, that's, I guess, just about everything, the website,
It doesn't
emails.
include the website. It includes, it's basically the network administration, making sure the servers are working, that all of the remote locations are talking to each other the way they should. As Janice mentioned, they make sure that the backups are run both internally and externally. We have backup stored off-site. And do some of the physical maintenance on the servers that's necessary.
That gives us an idea of what all's in technical services. You guys have any more questions about the first item?
Projects yet?
No, not yet. Now we're ready for B, presentation of R&R projects and expenditures.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, basically the next sheet in your binders is the documentation to the project cash flow sheet that we put together. And it includes all the projects that we've got, that we budget for and start work on. And it includes the reserves and the expenditures from those reserves, as well as the funding of those reserves over the coming fiscal year.
Can you explain a couple of these projects to me? FEMA mitigation, $3,092,000.
Where's our litigation? What was that?
FEMA mitigation,
6-1 now.
$3,092,000.
That is the FEMA hazard mitigation project where we're applying for switchgear and all the lift stations and
Right.
then the 10 generators as a separate project. We have to front the money and then we get 85% of it back.
So in our budget down here, is it gonna show that we're getting some of that back?
We don't have it in there because we don't know when those payments are going to come in.
So we're not gonna spend it till we know got the money coming. We've already spent it?
It's budgeted in there. It hasn't been spent, but is budgeted, the full amount's budgeted and taken out of the available funds so that we don't overspend.
So this was
But
budgeted,
we'll get money coming back in, revenue to put
That is
Put
correct.
85% of it.
85% of it will be put back in.
Okay, then on the lift station fall protection brackets, $350,000. How do we determine that?
Those fall protection brackets, that is basically if you take our total lift station numbers and multiply, and it's 160 of them, they're like 25,000 a piece to put those fall protection brackets in. So that would be to install them at every lift station. Or rather yet, have someone else install them at every lift station.
And the galvanized water line replacement, 1.2 million?
That is based off of the footage of galvanized water mains that is listed in GIS to replace that with PVC so we can get as much galvanized as a system as we can.
So we're gonna start spending that this July, $50,000.
With your approval, yes, sir.
And who's gonna do that work?
Water distribution.
Okay.
It'll be in-house work.
And the odor and corrosion control.
That's to put bio towers at lift stations.
Okay.
So the galvanized water line place, that's a 6-year project approximately.
We kind of, well, no, sir, those are quarters, not years on your sheet across.
Okay.
Well, that's what I figured. I mean, those are quarters, that's $200,000 a year
Right.
divided by.
But with that being said, we somewhat had to limit it. If we're gonna do it in-house, we can't necessarily, we're going to have a difficult time putting out $300,000 for the pipe in a month. You know, it's a.
No, I agree with
Somewhat
that.
limited there. So that's a long-term project that we'll schedule in once we, once we figure out the whole area and then do it in-house.
At the next facilities meeting, I'd like for you to go over in more detail those.
Sure.
all these.
So I guess,
But my biggest
Okay.
concern is BCP rehabilitation, $10 million.
And Commissioners, first, this schedule is one that we were asked to put together at the chairman's request to put together a model to make sure that we had enough money going forward. So the projects in here are not necessarily cast in stone. This is a model of how much money we would have available to spend and where we would anticipate spending it. For any of these projects that currently aren't on the books, the staff will have to come to the Facilities Committee, have that project approved, and then the Finance Committee would have to concur that there is enough money in the reserves to put that project on that list. And then once that project falls on the list, then we can more clearly define which quarters or years those expenditures would be incurred, so that we can track the money along. And again, this is just a representation of a working model right now.
I understand that, but we got 5 or 6 projects here that facilities is not approved yet.
Yes, sir. And
Commissioners
again,
not
this,
approved that we're talking about projecting through.
yes, we were asked to put any projected or projects that we may project on here, even though they haven't come before the commission's
I didn't want us to have
committees for
surprises.
approval.
I wanted to be conservative, to make sure we had the projects on the list that we could imagine that we would be doing.
and I guess, and that makes sense, I guess I was just thinking somehow we need to earmark up, I mean, for example, I'm making something up, but, you know, SR 99 water main extension, doesn't really do any good to extend the water main 90% of the time. 90% of the way, you either gotta do all or nothing. And why run a line 90% of the way, you gotta run either all or nothing. But when it comes to something like galvanized pipe replacement, I mean, that could be done 10% of the time, 5% or whatever. I mean, you know, you could do a small chunk over here on St. Simon, a small chunk of South Mainland, a small chunk of North Mainland. It's not an all or nothing, so somehow we need to, and I don't want, you know, somehow we need to delineate, while there's 1.2 million for galvanized water replacement.
I think that's what staff would bring before the Facilities Committee to more fully identify which each of these projects is.
Take a 2-year pause, it's not killing us. I mean, that money's flexible, where some of this money, once we earmark it, is gone.
Until we enter into a contract, either with an engineer or a contractor, it's still our money to change for what we want to use it for.
Yeah, and if I may just summarize for me, we've put placeholders for funding to help our cash flow understanding going forward, and recognizing that we Facilities Committee hasn't approved these, but because we're at the genesis of generating the budget for the next fiscal year, we have to have a placeholder for the cash flow looking out well beyond the next fiscal year. So from my understanding, I'm comfortable with what we've done here, and it's representative of a reasonable cash flow, and then we'll get into more nitty-gritty when this comes before the Facilities Committee, and we'll talk about more specifically, here's our capability, what our resources can produce, and then we'll adjust from there. Is that a reasonable synopsis
Yes,
of
sir.
what we're talking about?
And
Okay, thank you.
The flow chart that we just handed out to each of you, LaDonna did earlier today, and that just represents the connection between the operating budget and the project's budget, in that there's a budgeted transfer to the reserves in the operating budget that goes as a source of funds in this project budget.
Right, and I understand from the finance side, I'm good with this. We'll get another bite at the apple when it comes to facilities, and drill into it a little closer and talk more detailed about the cash flow and the project viability and when it can be initiated, et cetera. So, thank you.
For the commission's reference, nothing below CCTV pump station 4105 has been approved yet. So that's kind of your break point.
Important in this process is that if you go to is the impact on reserves. If you go to the second page of this document that you're looking at, and you'll see the repair and replacement reserve. and you go all the way out so that you only have 2 columns left. Those are in the next fiscal year, but these first 4 columns are the first 5. The second, third, fourth, and fifth columns are fiscal year 2020. And you'll see an ending balance there in R&R of $4,440,000. And that's based on the drawdown that's coming from those projects above. But also notice that you have transfers coming into the reserve of $5 million. $5 million coming into the reserve. So that $5 million, if we weren't transferring $5 million in from this operating budget that we're approving, then we would be negative in R&R. So it's important to note that we're consuming, we've got $10 million sitting there in R&R right now, but it's going to be gone at the end of the next year, to the extent that we're even going to have to fund it with another $5 million. So that bottom line number that you're going to see on the final budget, it's important that we have money there left over from revenues to fund the reserves with. $5 million or more. It'd be good to have more.
Well, I think the takeaway from this is that we've got a good look ahead here, a good and a reasonable plan. And broad brush is that the cash flows are supportive of a reasonable business execution plan.
The third page has capital improvement fund, reserves, and SPLOST. And it's just a forecast.
So on the capital improvement, the transfers to reserve 437,500 is our estimate of what we're gonna make in tap fees?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
And then the other is what you think we'll spend in expansion of the system?
Yes, sir. But this, I don't want to get ahead of where we're at in the process and get off into a tangent. We are looking at the tap fees right now.
Okay.
Yes, right now, estimated tap fees, we're estimating about 500 a year is the estimate. And then based on what we've received so far, because some are water, some are sewer, some are both, the average tap fee paid is about $3,500. So that was what we used to project forward in that. And we've built this so that we can change that tap fee number to see what the effect of that would be.
Okay.
So in that section, you have tap fees coming in. And then you may notice the unsolicited proposal payments. We really didn't know what number to put in there, but we know that there will be money flowing out to pay those proposals. So that actually reduces the funds coming into the reserve.
So now in the last quarters of the next fiscal year, you also see transfers to SPLOST. That was a transfer that was approved by the commission a couple of months ago to provide the money to finish the SPLOST projects above what the SPOS collections are estimated to be.
May change based on the scope of the work that we've talked about recently.
This all makes sense to everybody? It's just to show the general idea that we're not only budgeting the money we need to spend in the plants and in the collection system for operating, but we're also looking at the projects, the reserves, the impact to the reserves, all those things come together, and the money has to come from somewhere to pay for these things. Rates, revenue, loans, all of the above.
Pennies from heaven.
Pennies from heaven. Donations. Is that enough on projects and expenditures? Reserves funding and drawdown, we talked about that. Item E, operating expenses.
Mr. Chairman, that's the document I spoke about when I first started out, this handout that I passed around everybody. This basically outlines the object codes for the list of accounts that we charge our operating expenses to throughout the organization. The line across the top shows all the various operating divisions that we have. I did not show the numbers for the governing body, but they're very minor, and they are included in the totals. But just for ease, I limited to the operating divisions that are actually performing in the field, those kind of things. What we did was we put together each division's object code expenses. We came over and looked at the totals for each line and looked at the what we're going to be projected to do through the year end, and that's the kind of bluish tinted column. We looked at what the budget is for that particular item in total for fiscal 19 that we're in now. And then what we show is the budget requirements for fiscal year 2020 in the greenish column. I looked at, in the column just past the blue, the difference between fiscal year 2019 versus 2020 to show the increase or decrease, then a percent change of that total, and then explanation of what went into the issues that drove the number up or down. The last column we've got out there, and one of the issues that we try to do, again, this was some of the guidance that we got from Commissioner Copeland, or Chairman Copeland, was to look at key goals that we wanted to achieve as an organization to enhance the performance of our organization. As you can see, I don't know, we don't have it in here, but it was in the packets that were sent out. The 4 key goals that we had were raise the level of sophistication in project execution so that we're anticipating, knowing that we've got everything in line, we don't have problems when we go out and execute a capital project, we're ready to go. More so than maybe we have in the past. It means greater examination and maybe different sets of resources being applied. Increased focus on improved maintenance, housekeeping, and wastewater treatment plants, collection system, and water production. Those were picked out because they're particularly, they have a lot more level or opportunity of complexity and more opportunities for failure. And they, at this time, need a great deal of attention because the processes and protocols haven't always been in place, and the funding hasn't always been in place to stay up with what we needed to do to be proactive on each of those. So we made that a goal to make sure we're paying close attention to what we are doing and what we need to fund to make sure that all the things we schedule happen. The next goal we had was to improve customer service, and I'm going to say, in my mind, it was a specialized customer service need, more pointed at making sure that we're business friendly to our commercial and business entities in the community, and that we are looking at the development projects that are coming along and the review processes and making sure that everybody's getting the information they need, the review, input, and getting it in a timely manner. So we wanted to make sure we're looking for things that would help enhance that. The last major goal that we identified was to improve resources management, and that covers a lot of things. Do we have too many people in a particular task? Do we have not enough? Do we have the right equipment doing that task? Do we need a different piece? Do we need to reduce some of the resources we have and provide it over to one of the other operating divisions? So it's an overview of what we've got going on, what we need to be doing, better manage our resources, whether it's materials coming in here, whether it's equipment, whether it's manpower. So those are the four main goals. And in this last column of the sheet that I referenced to, we try to identify for each of the areas that we made changes that were related to those goals, what those goals specifically were that were enhanced by the changes we made. So that's kind of the gist of it. Now, back to what I said earlier about understanding the requests that were made. Our instructions, as we understand it now, were to add the vehicles and equipment back up into the budget, which we have done. We then were told to take the original operating budget and reduce it by a set amount. We went back, made the changes that were requested, and we are within 179 on that 23,129,700 budget. So we're very, very close to it, and there are a couple of discretionary areas, but it was like the WARMAC funding for the sampling that we do every year, which I wouldn't, at this time I held off on taking that kind of thing out. And another was an area that was gonna specifically help us in technical services. We've enlisted the help of a local consultant to help us build the critical equipment inventories for our process areas, that being the plants right now. And what we'd like to do is expand that into the lift stations and into the water production facilities in fiscal year 2020. So we put some money in there. Beyond that, we want to make sure that each and every one of those critical assets or critical pieces of equipment, the preventive maintenance tasks that go with that are built into our asset management program, such that we know we're getting the right things done, we know whether we're getting it done timely, and we know what we're expending to get those things done. So those are the pieces that will that were left in that maybe could have helped us nail that budget right on the head, but we're real close without it, and it was one of those decisions.
Let me ask you a question. You said you eliminated WARMAC.
We didn't.
We didn't?
In this final, but I'm saying we could to get us a little
Okay,
closer
then-
because it's
then
discretionary.
What's this explanation here?
Oh, I'm
It says
sorry.
you did.
Oh, I'm sorry. That was one of the corrections I made this morning as we were going through the budget.
Okay, so you left it in.
I didn't get all my explanations checked off where I made changes. These were the explanations I had made in the prior budget, and I was gonna hand that one out today, but when we got the changes in the
Okay.
correction this morning, I apologize. I can go back and get those correct.
So the numbers are correct, it's just the note.
Yeah, there, on the couple where I had taken things away and put it back, that may be it.
Alan, you took money from the operations. You don't show how much you reduced the operating budgets for the operating activities, correct?
I think they reduced a total of about $700,000, no, about
The operating activities.
$880,000.
Not, if we're talking about the operating divisions,
Yeah, operating.
water production, water distribution, wastewater collection, and wastewater treatment, we took out a total of, let me think through the numbers real quick. It was, $600,000.
Okay.
Just a little over, just a hair over 600,000.
What does that do to your, what can't you do that you were planning on doing, the operating?
The big one point hit, which, at very worst, the biggest hit we took was on our, purchase infrastructure repairs, which, we took a big chunk out of the $1 million budget we had there to try to absorb some of these, other costs and.
Is that
still
for the
achieve it.
manhole repair?
It is for the manhole repair, but remember, if we spend, it's kind of like Commissioner Stevens was talking about a while ago. We can spend $1 million, or we can spend $750,000, or we can spend $1.5 million. There's enough network need. Anything we do is an improvement. We're not gonna knock the whole thing out in 1 year by any stretch, so we can afford to. I don't think it's,
Well, let me say that more goes into there than just manholes.
well, that's true too.
That's not just manhole repairs. That's any asset that we work on, pipes, that's where paving goes when we have to pave back over after we have to cut a road. So there's more in that line item than just manholes.
Slip lining.
Yeah, CIPP work, if we hire somebody in to work on
Okay,
something.
well, I'm confused now. What is the operating, what's in the operating division's budget and what's in R&R?
The operating division budget would be things that were more ongoing type maintenance work that we do instead of necessarily specific project work that's specific to a general area of town. Usually our projects are fairly localized as a project. And this is more work, ongoing work for assets that need attention but aren't necessarily causing us huge issues, but causing us issues. Like, we're not caving the road in, but we're getting a lot of water in the pipes.
An example of a project type, you get find a sinkhole in the road, those kind of things. Well, we may get a contractor to come in and help us with that, or if we've got a particular line that needs some help, spot repair, that kind of thing, and we don't have the resources to do it, we could use these funds to help with that.
Would it be helpful if they had prepared a schedule of, these are the items, these are the risk areas that we have, that have been impacted by our reductions, and these are the areas that we can anticipate there's a high probability we'll come back to the commission for more money next year outside of the operating budget?
I'd
That
like,
be-
yeah, I'd like to
Help.
follow on for an understanding. I like where you're going with your approach, Commissioner Copeland. But let me just ask this fundamental question. I look at that object code that comes under purchased infrastructure repair. I think that's the category we're talking about. And so year-end projection is approximately 1.7 million. We had 1.9 budgeted for the fiscal year, so we're going to underspend that plan as it was anyway. So compared to the year-end forecast and what we're budgeting for FY20, we're $842K below where we might have been if we just left it flat. So am I understanding that you've made a reasonable risk assessment of where we should deploy the funds on the various infrastructure repairs? And based on that reasonable assessment you've done, you say, okay, this is the number. FY20 is going to be 1.1 million going forward. Unlike FY19, we planned 1.9 and we didn't reach, or we're not going to reach that. So tried to boil that down, Jimmy. Is that kind of what you've offered us here?
Yes, sir, that
Okay.
is in fact it, and as we look at, some of the other needs, we're trying to achieve a goal, and we've taken the calculated risk, that's an area that we can.
Yeah, and if I can put it in other words, you've made a risk assessment and you decided here's where the funding needs to go. And that's where our experience tells us we need to spend the money in the next fiscal year.
That's
Okay, I'm good with that. Thank you.
Would it be beneficial, I mean, I'm sure several of us have some line items that we kind of went around and each of us kind of one by one talked about a few line items that we might have questions about, or?
Sure.
I mean, is that valid?
Now's the time to ask those questions.
Do you want me to start?
Go ahead.
Two things, really, regular wages and overtime. I noticed here in overtime, we've got about a $7,000 increase to what we actually spent this year. And the reasoning is this increase comes from one source. We have lost a significant amount of wastewater treatment operators. We're gonna run overtime until we can get them filled. So we have a vacancy that we're covering with overtime.
Okay. Maybe I didn't explain it correctly. There's personnel there, but until they get their licenses, which takes a year
At least a year, usually 18 months.
to get that license, we've got to have a licensed operator at the plant. So the folks that are licensed that still remain on our staff have to work some overtime to give us cover.
Okay, well, that makes sense. That's what I was gonna point out, if it's a vacancy, then there should be a empty bucket up here that this bucket is offsetting.
We had a grand plan in wastewater treatment to help reduce overtime by changing our scheduling, and we changed the scheduling, and they didn't get their overtime, and 3 of them quit. So now we're having to work overtime to cover for them while the other people get their licenses.
FICA and Medicare expense, I noticed they're disproportionate to wages. Are they, did FICA percentage change federally or something?
No, sir.
Why are they up disproportionate to wages? I mean, I would think that FICA is really a percentage of wage.
In terms of the overall change,
In terms of wages, so I mean, wages, we actually spent this year 7,367. I'm sorry, 7,376. $7,376,000 is what we spent in wages. In FICA, we spent 445,000. Well, we're planning to spend this year in wages $7,574,000, and we're planning to spend in FICA $492,000. I can't talk today. Those numbers are disproportionate. So the percentage of FICA for what we actually spend, the percentage of FICA for budget are not the same percentage.
yeah, and you have to include overtime in that too, in that computation. So you'd have to take the wages plus overtime.
I didn't add those to see if that would be proportionate, but, okay. And the same thing with Medicare expense, I know it's not.
I could do the math for you if you wanted, but.
Well, that's what I did here, I just didn't include overtime, so.
The increase in overtime drove it up.
You know, the FICA should be 6.2% of salaries, or salaries and overtime. And the Medicare, 1.45%. Roughly, we round off to even $100.
Okay. All right, that makes sense.
That's a good observation.
Yeah, I did not include overtime, so that's, I was just doing napkin math over here. Technical services, you notice the document we got just a few minutes ago we looked at, said we've actually spent $403,000 in technical services. But the number in the budget said we've actually spent $481,000.
We got a few more months to go.
Right, this is the number we're projecting to spend. What you had on the other sheet is what's been spent.
Okay. So we're projecting to spend 481, why are we going up almost $50,000 there? What are we,
That's the bulk of that increase is to get the preventive maintenance development on the lift station and water production facilities.
so it's mainly for training and maintenance? So if you go back to training and maintenance, it's also up considerably, and it has the same.
That's not necessarily training. They're actually developing the program for us to, they're going through the system and cataloging all the PMs that need to be done. They're not necessarily training us on how to do the PMs.
Okay, I got you. So the training is up also about $80,000 over this year, about 50%.
Hang on, I'm
About
trying to
halfway down the next page,
Hang on, I'm trying to get there.
education, training, and travel. We're on track to spend 153 and next.
52, that's 3710, 52, 3710.
Yes, sir. One thing I will say there too is training is definitely not something that's a linear expense. You know, there'll be some months where we don't send anybody anywhere, there'll be some months we send 5 people somewhere. So I wouldn't necessarily say that projection is always accurate on those type line items because they're not linear expenses. We have GRWA coming up in May. We've got a distribution training class going on right now. We've just sent some guys for some pump training, so you know some of that projection may not be exact because that's not a linear expense.
Okay.
Also, P&C went up
PNC went up, did some things, and so we've actually, expended a decent chunk of money so far since this projection was done.
Notice electricity's down considerably. Do we really anticipate us being able to cut electricity that much, or? I say considerably, it's about 50 grand.
Which item is electricity?
It's on the.
531230.
On page 3, it's on page 3. bottom.
We are going through our system specifically on the lift stations right now, and we have identified several pumping problems that are getting corrected. Maybe we had pumps that had holes in the volute that were causing a waste of electricity. We had some rack pumps that were consistently ragging up that are a waste of electricity. So as we're identifying those, the lift station budget for electricity should decrease. I will say that, that also is dependent on how much it rains.
Aren't you, there's another thing that you.
And at the wastewater plant, especially at Academy, we're going to be shutting down another aeration basin, only running with one aeration basin, which will cut 6 more 50 horsepower mixers off of that constant run as well. So there are things we can do to certainly impact our electricity bottom line.
I'll actually improve performance of the plant is what you were saying.
We were talking about electricity.
Two last ones, there's about a $70,000 increase, and there wasn't hardly anything there before for furniture and computers. Bottom of the last, or third page.
The computers are because Windows 7 is no longer going to be supported, so we have to replace the Windows 7 machines. The furniture and fixtures, you've got 2 groups that have that in there. The purchasing or procurement group is to buy shelving units for the warehouse, and the furniture and fixtures for wastewater treatment is to replace some very poor condition stuff that they're working with right now. Unfortunately, wastewater treatment tends to get whatever's left over, so we're gonna replace some of their stuff that's falling apart.
And my last comment, pension expense, we're budgeted to spend exactly what we spent last year, but the first budget draft that came up had a considerable increase, which I assume was like a catch-up provision for our pension. So are we just kicking that can down the road by not funding it this year, or
When we-
not underfunding the pension? Are we?
The original budget, in the original budget, we took the anticipated contribution for next year and added 20% to that to try to catch up on some of the unfunded liability. That was an elective additional contribution to the pension, and in order to cut the budget down, we removed that.
It was gonna basically, there's a schedule that has been set up for us to get back to where fully covered. That was gonna knock off, what'd you tell me, 6 years?
Yeah, that's going to reduce the amortization period by a period of years.
I guess that's my concern, and I don't know much about pensions. I just wanna make sure we're not underfunding our pension and just kicking that can down the road.
No,
It's in future years, somebody have to deal with.
Well,
no,
well, yeah,
we still have a minimum contribution that we have to make to the pension each year based on the actuarial study, and we'll be making that contribution.
So the original number was advancing the schedule, where this
sir.
one is holding the schedule.
Yes, sir.
So holding the schedule is going to meet our obligations.
Pardon me?
Holding the schedule as is will meet our obligations in that regard, so.
And that's all I wanted to verify, that we were not short selling ourselves in order to,
No, sir.
I just wanna make sure we weren't taking just ridiculously easy cuts and leaving hard ones on the table for future generations.
On the last page, it looks like our operating budget is going to be slightly more than it is projected to be in fiscal year 19. But so far as keeping the budget at 33 million, we're adding another million to replacement and repair reserves. But it looks like our budget's actually going up 3 million over what it is estimated to have been in fiscal year 19.
There's some non-operating expenses that were really big, Commissioner Trump said, that the interest payments that I think we explained in the notes in the budget, what was it, John?
I think he's talking about the difference between projected or year-end estimate and next year's budget. He's talking about $3 million change here, I believe.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, see, last year's budget was 31,915, and this year's 33,279.
The fiscal year-end estimates are just that, they're an
He
estimate.
he is looking at that. He said $3 million change, I thought it was that.
He's talking about-
What he's mentioned, if you look at the line item, debt principal, because of the refinancing that occurred, debt principal has changed from the last year to this year. And
$1 million.
this year we have, it's up by $1 million.
Is that gonna be that way for how many more years?
No, sir. When the bonds were refunded in late 2017, there was a significant savings in the debt
Right.
service. All of that savings was front-loaded into the first about year and a half or so of the new debt service schedule. So there is a bump next year, and then it pretty much levels out for the next, I believe, next 5 years or so. Then there's a slight decrease after that for the remaining term of the bond.
It levels out at $2.9 million. The debt principal levels out at $2.9 million for the next 5 years.
Actually takes a little bit of a dip next year, and then about 5 years from now, it takes another dip, so that will keep going down
Over time.
over the years.
Now, there's another
It'll
item,
decrease a little bit, but remain relatively constant.
But our budget in fiscal year 19 was $31,915,000, right?
Yes, sir.
And now we're increasing it to $33,279,000.
okay, there's other non-operating issues that are in play. If you'll notice in the two lines up there above the numbers you just quoted, our fiscal year 2019 R&R reserve contributions, $5,259,900. We're a little over $1 million greater in reserve contribution in fiscal year 2020, so that's a big chunk of that. We could go through and dissect the other littler pieces, but we've got some big contributions to interest into that.
So $1 million of that
So
is
where
debt
we-
principal.
Where are those numbers, Jimmy?
On that second, when you look at the three,
R&R.
let's see.
I
right there at the
see,
bottom of
I
the
see we're
summation,
increasing the reserve.
The R&R reserve in the green column is $6,294,850 is the contribution that we're projecting or budgeting for fiscal year 2020. If you look in the yellow column, the amount we budgeted this year was $5,259,900. So you're over $1 million additional going into the reserve out of the funds we collect this year, and that's driving.
As well as the $1 million in debt. So
What's
you
that?
got $2 million between those two line items.
Yes, I see that. But,
So that's pretty much.
so this for fiscal year 19 budget, we actually got a whole lot more revenue than we anticipated
Yes, sir. As it turned out,
from the rate increase we had.
yes, sir, without doing anything else, that's gonna happen
Did we have more water usage?
slightly.
Yeah, that's kind of,
Just very slightly. There were a couple of things in play there, Commissioner. If you remember, we changed the rate schedule, or the rate computation last year, how they're computed, so there were some additional billings from having the first 1,000 gallons of water in the base fee, so that added a tiny bit of income. There was also an amount included for price elasticity, because rates were going up, the usage would go down some. That, in fact, didn't materialize, and usage is actually up a little bit. So and a combination of other factors contributed to generating more income than the rate model that we had indicated that we would with the rates that were put into place.
Usage is up right at 3%.
And we had budgeted, I believe, a 3% elasticity, so that's actually a swing of 6% in the.
you know, what you don't have out is the sheet that came with the second budget that shows that their year-end estimate is for revenues to be at $35,077,367. Is that still your estimate?
It's in that ballpark. I won't speak to the exact number, but yes, it's in that ballpark.
So it's gonna be
So the budget,
$5 million over what we estimated last year, our revenue for last year. is
Closer
gonna
to
be
3 million.
the budget
got right at
revenue
32
was
is the budget.
32 million,
32 million, and what's our total revenue?
35. So really, we're $3 million ahead right now, if I understand correct.
If we hit this, this is an estimate.
But the revenues are gonna have to really be watched to make sure we're on target to make the 33. And that's one of the things that concerns me.
Yeah, just when I look at the expenses overall, line by line, we get down to the bottom line, and we say we had 2 million, which was the significant increase in just two items only. That's the debt and then the R&R funding. So those are pretty significant. And when we look at approved FY19 versus approved or proposed, I should say, FY20, FY20 is 1.3 below the approved 19 number. So while I think we each share the same concern about our revenues, if the increase or growth, if you will, Andrew, to use your term, stays at 3%, we're still going to be positioned very, very well. If the revenues don't come in as we project, Jimmy, then it's going to be a little close watch on it as we execute throughout the year. And my thoughts are is we need to scrutinize our execution plan every quarter very, very close as to what can be suspended or possibly delayed, if you will,
Yes, sir.
to the next quarter as we begin to see what our revenues are actually going to produce so that we can fund the R&R, and, you know, in addition, obviously, to the normal operations budget. So, you know, overall, you know, bottom line, I'm very supportive of where we are. I think Commissioner Copeland has driven this thing to the point where, at least for me, I'm quite comfortable with what we have in front of us. With the caution that Commissioner Elliott offers, I certainly endorse, is that we've got to watch the revenues and be sure they really are supportive of our burn rate throughout the year. You know, you can report out monthly, but on a quarterly basis, we'll have to scrutinize it to, you know, do our look ahead, 6-month look ahead every quarter so that we know that the cash flow is going to support the execution plan. We've got a very, very aggressive construction plan over the next 18 to 24 months. And I would just caution all of us to say we can't take our eye off of that ball because it can be so easy to slip a couple of percent, and that's going to be a huge multiple when we're spending, we're committed to spend, and we need to execute, you know, the taxpayers' wishes on the SPLOST money, for one, in addition to our other significant capital plans. So it's going to be a big challenge as we go forward.
We got some good news, speaking of SPLOST this year. At the Oversight Committee, the perception I got was that it looks like some of the bottlenecks on the county project at the canal crossing, or Canal Road rather, looks like that may be on the path to resolution, and that may be moving ahead with final plans, which we've already received a copy.
We've got their CAD drawings on the new traffic circle, so we know where it's gonna be now.
I
So it
want
looks
to
like
ask
we're
another
gonna be
question.
hitting the schedule.
Great. Great.
I have one question on the revenue again, on your year-end estimate. What is the damage reimbursement? Is that from FEMA?
Yes, sir. And/or
Okay.
wrecked vehicles.
Yeah, it's a number of things. The majority of it's
So-
FEMA reimbursement.
So did you take that out of, you should take that out of this somehow. And that would give me a little bit more understanding. Service fees are way up. I don't understand that exactly.
What are you looking at, Commissioner Elliott?
I'm looking at, the revenue sheet that we provided.
You don't have this sheet. This was from the initial book that we
We got it
had.
right here, though.
If you brought
Yeah.
your second
In a
version
way.
of the budget, you have it.
It's shown on the next sheet on this though, right there.
Well, I don't know, I think we need to look at this thing. Now, look at
Right
it
here.
more.
It's on the one before last sheet of this packet. But the packet that started with the peach on top,
Is
Yeah,
that
but
just the,
that's-
that's just the FY
That's
20?
just the 20.
oh, it's just the budget, right, not the projections, you're correct.
So
You want to see that?
if you take out the 724 and the 177, and that puts you down,
Well, I see what you're saying on the year-end projections.
yeah. And late payment fees, that's kind of like high. So I just think there's some things there that we need to watch. And operational tap fees, that's probably about right. I don't know.
What was your question on the operational tap fees? That's the portion of the capital improvement fee outside of the 6,800. So every.
Yeah, I know, I know what it is, I'm just going, the word I'm hearing is that building's slowing down.
Operation tip.
A lot of the cost for the meters and so on would be, if the tap fees aren't collected, we wouldn't need to be buying the meters and the other supplies and.
So there's an offset if it
There
doesn't.
would be some reduction in expenses
expense.
if that revenue
It
doesn't get
gets,
expended.
gets back to what Commissioner Duncan was saying, we gotta watch it every step of the way.
Yep.
So our service fees, what did we say our service fees were for?
That's,
The 1.17 million, that's $800,000 more what's in our budget.
Yep.
And it's more than what was in the budget for
those service fees are, a good portion of that were cut-off fees that were charged earlier in this year when we were going full steam at collect and cutting off customers for collections. There were an awful lot of cutoffs during I believe it was first quarter of this year, last quarter last year. So those fees won't be generated, and in some cases, it's booking revenue that we probably wouldn't collect anyway. So we've reduced that to a more
Did we
reasonable.
collect this amount this last year?
Pardon?
Are we anticipated to collect that amount though in
No, we're
this budget year?
It's
We're in-
billed but not necessarily received.
Yeah, it's billed, so it counts as revenue, but, and most of it we should collect, some not, but we've reduced that down to 300,000 next year, which is a more realistic number on an ongoing basis.
I think.
How much of that, how much of this have we already received?
Well, we probably should receive most of that, because I was actually referring to late fees, the 466. A lot of that was,
I'm talking about the service fees.
The 1.1.
you know, the service fees are cut-off fees. There's the $50 fee that's charged for opening or closing an account, after-hours turn-ons and that type of thing. The bulk of that $1 million was cut-off fees that won't reoccur next year.
Do we have, we're gonna be looking at the financials in the March here in a second. Do we have,
There's not a breakout of that, what that number is.
we don't have the service fees called out in there?
They're not broken down into this particular fees, no.
But from everything what I recall talking to Mr. Sellers, that the number of shut-offs has started to decline. And this was a 12-month linear projection as opposed to doing a arithmetic linear, when I say linear, it has no, we didn't take into account the slope of the change.
No,
We just took the number divided by 6A.
to the pro rata.
And then
So if we take away that and take away those damage reimbursements, then our revenue's projected to be about what our budget is. Like what Don was saying. Okay.
Do we need to reduce the revenue numbers down? No?
I think
Our
just
revenue
watch
projected
it.
to be revenue projected to be the same as what I put.
The user fee portions of the revenues are based on what we've actually billed this year. So assuming that our customer base stays the same and usage patterns stay the same into the next 12 months as they are this 12 months, we should meet those. It's reasonable to expect that we would meet those, the user billings. We have made some particular adjustments in the other incomes. You'll see tower rental has gone down. We've had several carriers leave our water towers, so that's gone down. We've taken away the $96,000 for the rent next door. We've reduced some of the fees that were, we charged more this year than we normally would because of accounts receivable collections. And there's some other specific adjustments down through here that.
John, let me ask another broad question. So we're looking at our revenue. We've expressed some concerns, and the concerns, I would just say cautions. And we think that new construction may be flattening out or tailing off even some. But relative to some 30,000 retail accounts we have, if we had no additional new customers due to construction, what percentage impact would you just give me a thumbnail that would impact our revenue forecast?
I wouldn't,
If we had
Is
no
that
new customers.
Right. If we had no new customers related to construction, to new houses or apartments, townhomes, et cetera, is that a 0.5% or as much as 1% of total new revenues? Or lower?
maybe,
Given that our customer base right now is what we're projecting into next year, it would have no effect.
Okay, that's what I was going with. It essentially is if new construction dries up in the residential market, basically, our revenues will have almost no impact in that regard based on our projections. Our projections are based on our current base of customers and what we've seen the market do and the market elasticity and the growth in consumption, if you will. Okay, thank you.
And the only revenue that would be impacted would be the operational tap fees, because you wouldn't be paying those, but you would be buying the stuff for the taps as well.
Right, understood. And I think, John, you reminded us a moment ago is that if we don't get a tap fee, we don't have a demand for the service and the parts, or the meter, if you will, and the equipment to connect it to the distribution system. So if one goes away,
The labor piece.
the
is still
comparable
there.
labor piece,
The labor piece is still there, but the
well,
the
they would be,
materials for it are-
presumably, we would redeploy that labor doing other useful activities. And if we didn't change the labor resource overall, we would be taking in more work insourced as opposed to outsourced.
one other consideration, Commissioner Duncan, is the fact that we've had on the wet side as far as years go, which means a lot of the whatever irrigation that we are providing, that's been held down. I think, so we're making conservative estimates based on what we're already achieving, which is ahead of budget, with that in mind. And the other thing that we've got to keep in mind is we're looking at what's happened so far year to date. We're getting up on some of our warmest, greatest demand months as a result of the tourism and the temperatures. Those aren't even factored in. So we've got a conservative number.
Right. And I understand that. I know from a weather average year, this month has been wetter than typical. This is the driest month we typically have in this region, and we've already met that rainfall. Now, the second half of the month looks like the forecast is going to be typical. But even so, the rainfall has already exceeded the yearly average, if you will, through these number of months. So we've probably gotten through the wetter part of the year. But this month and next are really kind of dry months for us in this region. So I'm okay with the forecast as you've offered it.
And as am I, just a question, how do we factor in REU audits with this?
That's basically, this is based on current REU assignments.
So, I mean, not necessarily what is this based off, I'm just asking, I guess, a general question. REU audits, how do we conduct those? When do we look at those? How often do we try to do an REU audit? I mean, obviously I'm just making something up, the Dollar General down here in Norwich, their REUs hadn't changed since they went in. But some corporations are steadily changing, steadily moving, steadily doing, steadily blah, blah, blah. How do we?
Our purpose is anytime there's if somebody comes through with a site plan that we've got to review, we take a look at it at that point. We most recently, we didn't have an REU audit team set up until here pretty recently, last, 5-6 months? And the process we're going through now is just looking at large volume changes in what the customers have, and then going out and doing physical audits of the facilities to see if maybe things were happening that weren't included in the review plans that we got to see in P&C.
Well, let me ask just a generalized question. Would you think that just all the way across the board from the companies that we've had since day one, that the amount of REUs we have on the books is accurate?
It's going way up.
Right, so how are we addressing, making sure that,
Here's how you address it. Number of REUs you've got don't change the revenues, a penny, or not, they're not supposed to, correct?
They increase the debt charges.
right,
As the REUs, you take the REUs at the beginning of the fiscal year, you divide that into the
Debt service.
debt service. And then if there's more REUs, that means the REU fixed charge shrinks, correct?
They would assume a rate change during the year.
So
If the
you-
rate, once the rate is fixed, the additional REUs increase revenue.
Yeah, until there's an annual reset.
Until the
until
end
there's
of the
a new
year.
reset.
I see what you're saying, and that makes sense. I just wondered if they're not, I mean, and you said we're just kind of recently done it. I mean, back when Steve Swan was here, he and I did one together for some of my accounts, and you know, they actually, some of them went down, some of them went up, but it was pretty much a net wash. But I was just curious how do we do that every 5 years, every 7 years? Do we only do it once, or, you know, I mean, because there are some entities
We're
that have
doing
changed.
right now, as the triggers tell us to.
Okay.
We don't just, hey, it's been 6 months, it's been a year, and go do it.
We'll be happy to sit down with the hospital and check their REUs.
Well, check
We're
their,
good. We've already done ours. I mean, I think we're in good shape.
they should have more because they're building that new wing.
No, they come in with a very good plan, told us what the changing was, there was no change in REUs from that.
It actually went down. We're doing less beds, we're just doing.
Are there any more comments on the budget?
Also,
I got one
Commissioner, when
question.
someone comes into customer service and signs up for a service, that they've bought a business and they need to change the names, that triggers somebody going out and
Okay.
reevaluating as well.
On the rate bill, you got something for debt, and it's based on the amount of debt that we have. Our debt's going up $1 million.
Yes, sir.
Does that
But,
mean we're gonna have an
going-
increase in the water rates and sewer rates?
Well, going back to the way the rate structure was redone a year ago with the Raftellus model, there is a mixture of costs, even though some of the debt,
Right.
the debt recovery the debt recovery fee times the number of REUs, in theory covers the debt service for the year. There is some bit of debt charge in the administrative charge. There is some water charge and sewer charge in the base fee for each month. The first 1,000 gallons of water and sewer, for instance, are included in that base fee. So there's some mixing of costs in the rate structure, but overall, the rate structure will recapture the funds necessary to cover the expenditure budget.
My question is, since we're gonna have an additional $1 million worth of debt this next year, debt principal to be on the bond payment, is it gonna affect our rates that we're
No.
charging our
No, sir.
customers?
No, sir. Because we were still collecting the same amount of debt, but because of the savings on the bonds, we put the overages, so to
Yeah.
speak, into
Okay.
the R&R.
Yeah,
Okay, so we got it already in here.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Put it in what, R&R?
Yes, sir. All the bond refunding savings went into R&R.
yeah, I had forgotten that, but the savings were an additional contribution above normal to R&R in the current year's budget.
Any more comments on the budget? Are we ready to recommend this budget to the full commission?
I move the budget to the full commission for approval.
Second.
This is a clarification, Commissioners. We need to also transmit this budget to the city and the county for their review and comment.
I think it has to get approved by the full commission before we can do that. This is just a committee meeting.
Typically, we've submitted it to the city and the county for their
I see.
comments, review and comment before it was approved. But should they send back anything that the commission would choose to change within the budget, we would have to adopt an amendment before,
Well,
we would have to adopt an amendment before the
okay,
next fiscal year
then I
begins.
amend my motion to say, I move that, okay, here we go. I move the Finance Committee recommend to the full commission that the Brunswick-Glynn County Joint Water Sewer Commission approve submission of the proposed fiscal year 2020 JWSC budget to the city of Brunswick and to Glynn County for their review and comment, and approval of the fiscal year 2020 JWSC budget in the amount of $33,279,000, subject to revision upon receipt of comments from city Brunswick and or Glynn County.
Second.
We have a motion and a
Second.
second on the table. Are there any further comments?
No,
Let's vote. All in favor?
yeah.
Motion passes. All right. Item 3, amendments to pension plan.
Commissioners, this came up at the last commission meeting, that there is, GMA needs to have us approve an amendment to our pension plan for changes made necessary by the change in federal tax law last year. I sent out, well, there is actually a transmittal with that listing all of the changes to the GMA's master plan. The first one, the final average salary and federal law compensation limits, was actually the only change in the master plan in this, or the master document. The others that follow that are historical changes that took place in prior amendments to that. I also sent out a marked up copy of both our current adoption and the amendment, and noted on, in a summary of the pages that had changed through that. There are a number of changes that are more technical corrections or verbiage corrections, where in our previous adoption, if there was no box marked, there was no election made in that particular provision. The new adoption has a none box in it, and that's pretty much all of the changes through there. In substance, there is no change in our our adoption into the master plan of GMA, and the the income limits that are stated here equate to about $275,000 a year in salary that would be the cap for the determination of final benefits when an employee retired. We're not going to have anybody even close to that. That's the 2018 limit. There is, I believe it's IRS Publication 560, that in 2019, that 275 goes to 280,000, and then there's a COLA adjustment after that. But that's, in substance, what it is. It's really a technical correction to the master plan of the GMA, and it doesn't affect our election our election choices within that plan.
And when do we need to return this?
This has to be back to GMA by May 15th.
May 15th. Okay. Any comments from your review?
First of all, my thoughts are is the summary of the changes were very beneficial. It allowed us to focus more on the budget issues as opposed to this compliance issue. And so I'm appreciative that you put together this summary, and what it does, basically, it just brings us back into compliance with the changes of regulation. So in that regard, it's in my view, it's a non-issue. It just needs to be passed and moved on.
And I did listen into part of the HR committee meeting this morning. There is one section on the green markup, which is the new adoption on page 27. I have one section that I marked as new. That really should be just, it's not really a new section, it's reworded and reorganized. The same provisions are within the original document, but they're spread in different places.
Yep. And
These
another
items-
comment, excuse me,
Go ahead.
Commissioner, is, John, we could have pushed this thing through at another meeting when it was first presented if we had this summary. So this is very, very beneficial. Thank you for putting it together now and going forward. It'll just help streamline our review and confidence level with what's presented to us.
I want to absolutely thank John for doing that, but I also want to thank Commissioner Stevens for pointing out, hey, here's a simplistic way to get to the bottom line when you've got this much information. So thanks to both.
I have one general question. These items that are in reference to governing body in this document, is that set by legislation? Or is that an election that we have made
That the governing body is not eligible.
participating?
That was an election that was made when our election into the GMA's master document was made back in 2007. It was made by the commission at that time.
So it's something that's at the discretion of the commission?
Yes, sir.
Any further comments?
I don't have any, I'm satisfied with what's in the document, what we're doing.
Yep.
Need a motion?
I was gonna let,
I thought this was just information.
Well, what you're looking for is a motion to recommend to push it
Moving
to
it
the full
forward.
commission.
I have to admit, the memo, I just realized the memo didn't get put on top of the document.
we don't have, we don't have,
I can make a motion that we take this existing document and put it, untable it, for lack of a better term. We tabled it the other day at the commission meeting and put it back on the full commission meeting docket for approval.
It was deferred,
Deferred.
deferred.
And I'll second that.
okay.
All in favor?
Aye.
Motion passes. Item 4, leak adjustments.
Mr. Chairman, this is a protocol that's dictated by the county ordinance, Chapter 2. Basically, we've gone through the process for 2 recent requests for leak relief. And on one case, the account for Mr. Raymond Trace, the leak relief number that was calculated for his situation was $2,344.37. The other customer was the Hampton Club on St. Simon's Island, and their leak adjustment was for $3,407.19. In the county ordinance, it requires that anytime there's an adjustment of over $2,000, that I must go to the full commission to get approval to pay that amount out. So I don't just write checks to people I know or that kind of thing. But the backup to it is attached in your binders. A more detailed, we can talk about the more detailed issues in there separately. But basically, what I'm coming to you today for is to request permission to issue the credits for these amounts to these 2 customers.
Any comments?
Other than I'm curious as to why they had such big leaks, but, you know, if you're saying it's a valid leak adjustment,
Valid leak adjustment. Staff has done reviews.
Do we know what caused the leaks?
There's some statements in here, Commissioner, from plumbers about what was repaired for each of those. Each of them basically is fittings or the actual pipe failures.
Mr. Chairman, I move that the Finance Committee recommend to the full commission that the Brunswick-Glynn County Joint Water Sewer Commission approve leak adjustments in the amounts of $2,344.37 for Raymond Trace and $3,407.19 for Hampton Club.
I'll second the motion.
All in favor? Okay, that's all of the approval items. So we have two discussion items, financial policies and financial statements.
Mr. Chairman, since this is a discussion item, and we haven't really looked at it yet, I'm just sitting here looking at it and going through it. I move that we, since it's not a critical time issue on this, that we table it or defer it until
Defer
the
it.
next Finance Committee meeting.
We probably don't even need a motion, do we, on a discussion item?
Probably not.
So we can just do that. I'm fine with that.
I think the trip needs to,
Say that one more time.
Needs time to read it.
Okay.
I was having a sidebar, I apologize. What was?
that's okay. I want to defer this document to the next meeting, and that way you and I can, Steve can have time to really go through it, because I think you and I were both, and Steve, kind of looking at the budget and other things, and so if we can do that.
I think that's a good idea.
Commissioners,
Clarify
it
what the
didn't really,
sidebar conversation was. I'm sorry, let me clarify what the sidebar conversation was. When we're in committee meetings, only the committee members can motion, second, and vote.
Okay.
If you're a visiting commissioner and not an actual member of the committee, then theoretically your vote doesn't count.
Okay.
So that was why we were having a sidebar conversation.
Do we need to revisit the thing we just talked about, or is it, are we?
I mean, we are informal in the committees, but I did ask Charlie about that recently, and that's what he had told me.
So the last one, we needed a second from the
So,
finance.
Yes, sir, so Commissioner Stevens seconded, and then,
I'll make the
I mean, you made the motion,
I'll-
and Elliot seconded.
Okay. What
Okay.
were you going to say, John?
Do we need to revote?
it didn't really show up on my photocopy anyway, but this is, the watermark draft didn't show up on all of these pages. It should be on there, and so it is,
Okay, I understand it's a
and
draft.
it's still very much a working copy of this. All of the changes from the original, the adopted financial policy are marked in blue in this one.
Okay.
Does this include our cutoff policies, or is this just?
No, sir, this is just, that's under a separate customer service SOP.
What are we planning to do about that? I mean, we kind of informally did some stuff. Or have we? Did I just, am I misunderstood?
On which portion of it?
The cutoff policy and.
Cut off.
No, I guess
Oh, that's,
we're talking about the ones that we have the people that were on payment plan that got shut off again, and then they came back for additional assistance? Or are we talking about when we cut somebody?
Really the whole thing, I mean, you know, and I don't want to get off the tear here and just, you know, everybody gives me a nod, I'll shut up, but.
well, I think they need to provide us a copy of it.
Yeah, I mean,
And then you can go through it and mark it up with your questions and things like that.
that's kind of what I'm thinking. I mean, is that we
So-
kind of, you know, I thought y'all were, you know, I mean, I know there's been a lot going on, but I thought y'all were kind of working on bringing up, revise something that made.
It is, wasn't, we are working on it, but it wasn't gonna be part of the financial policies that John's put together.
Is it something that can,
Towards the-
I guess I'm just asking, you know, sometimes things like this probe your memory on something else that we talked about a couple of months ago, but hadn't put to bed. And that's kind of, you know, what this did. It made me think, well, we talked about that a couple of months ago and we didn't put it to bed. And I didn't know we were still working on it, or if we tabled it or deferred it, or what was going on there.
are we ready to put the cutoff policy on the next finance committee agenda?
Yes.
Ready to go?
You all ready by then?
I don't see why we can't do that.
Let's just do that.
Yeah.
As long as you don't schedule a finance meeting for tomorrow.
We do have tomorrow morning open.
That's right. Tomorrow morning's fine.
Okay.
Don't encourage.
Current month financials. Last item, financial statements, month ending March the 2019.
Commissioners, you do have the financial statements in your packages, and I apologize, I didn't come fully prepared to talk about them today because we're changing budgets this morning and working on some other things, but just briefly turning to the third page, which is the combined revenue and expenditure for the 9 months ended March 31. You'll see that our actual year-to-date before SPLOST and capital tap fees were at $2.9 million of revenue. When we take the include the purchase orders in that, we're about 1.8, and projecting out to year end, if all still holds true and straight pro rata works for most of these line items, would be at about 3.5% or $3.5 million. And again, to Commissioner Elliott's point, that includes that large FEMA reimbursement and a lot of service fees. And that's really about my only comment on that. The page after that is by division, and the project report follows that. Again, I apologize, I didn't come prepared to make a lot of comments on that today.
Do the commissioners have any question on the March 2019 financials?
Wastewater treatment costs, they're projected to go up $400,000 over what was budgeted.
Yes, sir.
Is that because the dryer's been down?
The vast majority of it is because of dryer's been down, yes, sir. We're running about $350,000 projected over budget on biosolids because of that dryer. Plus the cost to fix the dryer.
What's the status on us purchasing the equipment, our trucks and everything?
The fleet manager's working on bid specs right now. As soon as we get the bid specs out, it'll be 30 days out, so you probably, we're still looking good for July 1.
On bid specs, do we leave it open to manufacturer? I know that one set of specs, a long time ago, it was kind of like it was so specific that there was no way anything Ford could qualify.
No, well, I would say for this, certainly we're gonna leave it open because we don't exactly have tons of these on hand to compare against. We had kind of written truck specs that we ordered, and they kind of fit Ford better than any of the other ones, simply because Ford typically gives us the best price by a substantial margin. So we can, any vehicles in next year's budget, we can open that up more, just through history. Ms. Pam said that Ford always came in with the lower cost.
And I think that's great that they do, and, we know kind of what it is. Just philosophically, I kind of think that we ought to, give it, let all the local participants, dealers be able to participate. And if we write something with a specific wheelbase that only Ford makes, it kind of limits other people. And, Chevy, Dodge, Ford, they all make a regular cab truck, and there's probably out of the 5 of us, we probably all three drive some, or 3 of us drive something different at least. I just think we ought to keep it open spec as much as we can reasonably. I mean, if there's something specific, then that's a requirement, that's one thing, but just
And I know we've had some problems at times getting some of the local non-Ford folks to respond, and as John was just pointing out to me, one of the other advantages of Ford is they win the state bid, so it's like, okay, well, if the state's done it, we can access it.
Well, and again, if they win, they win, but it's their choice not to be competitive versus us making it so restrictive they can't be competitive, and I just see a philosophical difference there.
Is that a state contract?
No, the state bids any number of products and services every year, and you can, as a municipality.
You can ride their contract.
You can ride their bid.
And I think
process.
that frees us up from having to do a local bidding competition. And so a lot of people do that.
Is that what we do?
Well, many times we get a better price from the dealers than we do on state bid. Not always, but some of the dealers are willing to give us a better price
I
than
guess,
that.
and if y'all disagree, that's fine, you know, we'll just get away with, I mean, I'll shut up, but I see a philosophical difference. If I'm Nally, that I could not be competitive because the state contract was such with Ford that the Chevy dealers can't compete. There's a philosophical difference between that, and on the other hand, joint water sewer saying you need a 79.1 inch wheelbase versus 79.3 inch wheelbase, and Ford makes a 79.1, the Chevy makes 79.3, and, you know, I can't even provide the product even if I wanted to, and you're limiting me versus me just not being able to be competitive. I just see a big difference there, and I think we ought to be able to, I think we ought to support the local business as much as we can, and give them at least the opportunity to be competitive.
I'm not sure that, I'm sure that this is legal, but you can do is advertise it such that this is what we can buy a vehicle at. Can you meet or beat this price off the state bid?
Andrew, this truck, we're calling a roll-off truck, and it's capable of hauling a 10 or a 20-yard container on the same vehicle. So is this similar to what some local companies are using as their roll-off vehicle trucks?
The hope would be to get the exact same thing they've got.
Yeah, like, I think of Liberty, Sapelo, and a few others, Amwaste.
Right, the folks, we're basically buying the same equipment the folks that are picking our stuff up now are using.
Okay, so I would think that producing the standard or the materials, vehicle specs should be a fairly simple thing since it exists already in the neighborhood. Okay, thanks.
What's our schedule now on when we'll be in the hauling business?
The hope is by July 1.
To actually be
Have a truck-
rolling?
Have a truck here and all the boxes here.
And what's the schedule on the repair of the Fenton dryer?
It's done.
It's
Dryer-
finished.
The dryer is running now. And it's putting out very nicely. Looks like nice topsoil.
Any further business?
All it sleds into.
Now it's biosolids at that point.
Any further business to bring before the committee? No.
Commissioner Copeland, do you know when you would like to have the next finance committee meeting?
I guess we need to get together on that. Probably be in 4 weeks.
Okay, so that would be Wednesday, May 15th. Our commission meetings are May 2nd and May 16th. So if you wanted the Wednesday for the second commission, it would be Wednesday, May 15th.
Let's announce that tomorrow at the commission meeting. Let me take a look at my schedule, talk to others. There being no further business come before the committee, it's closed.